The coyote's eerie howls echoed through the vast Wyoming wilderness as Catherine Williams stirred beside the cold remnants of what had once been her campfire, her thin blanket offering little protection against the bitter October night of 1885. Her fingers, stiff and nearly numb, clutched the worn leather journal that contained the last remnants of her former life, a life that had crumbled to ashes just like the dead fire before her. Catherine had been traveling for nearly 3 weeks since fleeing Denver, her meager possessions strapped to a stubborn mule that had abandoned her 2 days prior. The approaching winter had painted the landscape in shades of amber and gold, but the beauty was lost on her as exhaustion and hunger gnawed at her resolve. She'd been foolish to think she could make it to Laramie on her own, but desperation had a way of clouding judgment. As consciousness slipped away again, Catherine thought she glimpsed a distant flicker of light through the trees. But darkness claimed her before she could determine if it was real or just another cruel trick of her hope-starved mind. The rhythmic crunch of approaching hooves barely registered in her semi-conscious state. It wasn't until the unmistakable scent of fresh smoke tickled her nostrils that Catherine's eyes fluttered open. A tall figure crouched beside her, feeding kindling into a newly built fire that sent blessed warmth toward her frozen limbs. "Easy now, madam," a deep voice rumbled. "You're half frozen." Catherine scrambled backward, her hand instinctively reaching for the small derringer hidden in her boot. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice cracking from disuse and thirst. The man straightened to his full height, and in the growing firelight, Catherine could make out a weathered face beneath the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't young, perhaps 40, with lines etched around his eyes that spoke of years squinting against harsh sun and wind. "Name's Mitchell Blackwood," he said, keeping his distance and his hands visible. "Was tracking a wounded buck when I spotted your camp. No offense intended, madam, but a dead fire in these parts is as good as an invitation to the reaper himself." Catherine's gaze darted to the crackling flames, then to the man's horse, a magnificent chestnut stallion standing patiently nearby, laden with supplies. The temptation to rob him and flee crossed her mind fleetingly, but she pushed it away. She was desperate, not depraved. "Catherine," she offered reluctantly. "Catherine Williams." Mitchell nodded, then gestured to a pot he'd already set near the flames. "Got some coffee brewing. And there's jerky in my saddlebag. You look like you could use both." Suspicion warred with hunger. Why help a stranger? A ghost of a smile touched Mitchell's lips as he settled on a fallen log opposite her. "Because once upon a time, I was the stranger somebody helped. Out here, we pass those debts forward or we don't survive." He poured steaming coffee into a tin cup and extended it toward her. "I'll stay on this side of the fire, Miss Williams. You have my word." The warmth of the cup seeped into Catherine's fingers as she accepted it. "Mrs.," she corrected automatically, then bit her lip. "At least I was." Mitchell nodded but didn't pry. Instead, he busied himself with preparing a simple meal from his provisions. "I can escort you to the nearest town come morning. Wouldn't be right to leave you out here alone." "I can manage," Catherine replied, though they both knew it was a lie. "I'm sure you can," Mitchell said evenly. "But there's no shame in accepting help when it's offered freely." As the night deepened around them, Catherine found herself studying her unexpected companion. His movements were efficient, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. He wore no badge, but the Colt revolver at his hip seemed an extension of himself. A cowboy, certainly, but something in his bearing suggested more, perhaps a former lawman or soldier. "You're not just passing through," she observed after her second cup of coffee had restored some of her faculties. Mitchell added another log to the fire. "Got a small ranch about 15 miles northwest. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. Paid for it with 12 years of driving cattle and another 5 breaking horses that didn't want breaking." "Sounds lonely," Catherine said, immediately regretting her forwardness. But Mitchell just nodded. "It can be. Though I've got hands that help during calving season and roundup. Rest of the time, it's just me, the horses, and whatever God decides to throw my way." He glanced at her with quiet assessment. "What brings you out here alone, Mrs. Williams? If you don't mind my asking." Catherine stared into the flames, weighing how much to reveal. "Necessity," she finally answered. "My husband died 6 months ago. Consumption." The lie came easily now, practiced over weeks of travel. I'm headed to Laramie. My cousin owns a millinery shop there. Mitchell said nothing for a long moment, and Catherine wondered if he'd detected her falsehood. But when he spoke, his voice held only understanding. Tough journey for a woman alone. Your mule run off. Catherine nodded, relieved at the change of subject. 2 days ago. Spooked at something in the night. Took half my supplies with it. Lucky you kept your blanket, Mitchell observed. It was wrapped around me, Catherine admitted. Everything else was tied to the saddle. Mitchell rose and moved to his horse, returning with a thick woolen blanket that he offered with an outstretched arm, keeping his distance. Take this. It'll serve you better than that threadbare thing. Catherine hesitated, then accepted the blanket with murmured thanks. As she wrapped it around her shoulders, a warmth beyond the physical spread through her the forgotten feeling of simple human kindness. I'll keep watch tonight, Mitchell said, settling back on his log. You get some rest. You don't need to stay, Catherine protested weakly, even as exhaustion tugged at her eyelids. Mitchell's expression softened slightly. Nobody should be alone with a newly lit fire, Mrs. Williams. It needs tending, same as people do sometimes. As Catherine drifted toward sleep, warmed by the fire and Mitchell's blanket, she realized it was the first time in months she hadn't fallen asleep terrified of what the morning might bring. The dawn broke cold and clear, frost silvering the grass around their camp. Catherine awoke to find Mitchell already up, tending to his horse and preparing a breakfast of coffee and hardtack softened in a small pan with bacon grease. You stayed all night, Catherine said, surprise evident in her voice. Mitchell handed her a steaming cup. Gave my word, didn't I? There was something reassuring about his matter-of-fact manner that put Catherine at ease despite her usual wariness around men. During her flight from Denver, she'd encountered enough leering glances and unwanted propositions to justify her caution. Laramie's still a good 4 days' ride, Mitchell commented as they ate. I meant what I said about escorting you. Catherine studied him over her cup. Why would you delay your own journey for a stranger? Who said I'm delaying anything? Mitchell replied. I was heading back to my ranch anyway. Laramie's not far off my path. He paused. Unless you'd prefer to continue alone. The sensible answer was to accept his offer, but Catherine had learned the hard way that a man's help often came with unspoken expectations. What would you want in return, Mr. Blackwood? Mitchell's expression remained unchanged, but something flickered in his eyes, not offense, but perhaps a sad understanding. Nothing, Mrs. Williams. Except maybe conversation to pass the miles. Been tracking alone for a week. Catherine considered her options. She had little money, dwindling supplies, and no mount. Pride was a luxury she could ill afford. Very well. I accept your offer, Mr. Blackwood. Mitchell, he corrected. If we're riding together, might as well use my given name. Catherine, she returned, though the intimacy of it made her uncomfortable. She'd spent so long being Mrs. James Williams that her own name felt almost foreign now. Within the hour, they had packed Mitchell's supplies and extinguished the fire. He helped Catherine mount the chestnut stallion while he walked alongside, leading the horse by the reins. You should ride, Catherine protested. It's your horse. Mitchell shook his head. Sovereign, and I have an understanding. He carries what needs carrying. He patted the horse's flank. Besides, I've been in the saddle for days. Legs could use the stretch. As they traveled, Catherine found herself studying her companion's profile. Mitchell Blackwood was not handsome in the conventional sense that James had been. His features were too weathered, his nose slightly crooked from what must have been a break. But there was an undeniable strength in his face, a quiet dignity that James, for all his polished charm, had lacked. You mentioned a ranch, Catherine said when the silence had stretched too long. Have you always been a rancher? Mitchell adjusted his hat against the morning sun. No, madam. Spent my youth as a cavalry scout. After the war, rode with a cattle outfit out of Texas for a spell. Saved every penny until I could put down roots. The war? Catherine asked. You fought for the Union? A shadow crossed Mitchell's face. I did, though fighting's a generous word for what we did toward the end. He changed the subject with practiced ease. How about yourself? Always been a milliner's assistant. Catherine's hand tightened on the reins. No, I was a teacher before I married. Taught at a girls' school in St. Louis. That explains it, Mitchell said with a nod. Explains what? The way you talk. Got an educated sound to it. There was no mockery in his observation, just statement of fact. Catherine felt her cheeks warm. James had constantly corrected her speech, insisting she sound more refined for his business associates. It was strange to hear it noted without criticism. By midday, they stopped near a small creek to water the horse and rest. Mitchell produced dried apples and more jerky from his saddlebag, which they shared in comfortable silence. Catherine found herself relaxing in his presence despite her better judgment. "May I ask you something, Mitchell?" she ventured as they prepared to continue their journey. He nodded, waiting. "You said you're tracking. What exactly are you hunting this time of year?" Mitchell's expression turned grim. "Not what? Who?" He secured a strap on the saddle before elaborating. "Man named Thorn. Rustled 8 of my best breeding stock 2 weeks back. Killed one of my hands who tried to stop him." Catherine felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "You're not a lawman." "No," Mitchell agreed. "But Sheriff Hobbs has his hands full with a bank robbery in town, and those horses represent 3 years of careful breeding. The hand that died, Emilio, had a wife and child." His jaw tightened. "Some things a man has to handle himself." "And when you find this Thorn?" Catherine asked, already knowing the answer. Mitchell's eyes met hers, unflinching. "I aim to bring him back to face justice. But I won't lie and say I'd weep if he forces my hand otherwise." The quiet certainty in his voice should have frightened her. Instead, Catherine found herself nodding. After what she'd endured at James's hands, she understood that justice and law weren't always the same thing. "Enough about my troubles," Mitchell said, helping her back onto Sovereign. "Tell me about Laramie." "Your cousin expecting you." Catherine looked away. "Clara doesn't know I'm coming. We haven't been in touch for some years, but she's the only family I have left." Mitchell didn't press, merely nodded and began leading the horse once more. "Laramie's grown since I was last there. Good people, mostly. Your cousin's business should do well." As they traveled through the afternoon, Catherine began to notice Mitchell occasionally scanning the horizon, his hand sometimes drifting to the revolver at his hip. Though he maintained casual conversation, she sensed his growing unease. "Is something wrong?" she finally asked when he stopped to study the ground for the 3rd time in an hour. Mitchell straightened, his expression carefully neutral. "Just being cautious. These hills can hide all manner of surprises." "You think someone's following us?" Catherine stated rather than asked. After a moment's hesitation, Mitchell nodded. "Picked up signs a few miles back. Could be nothing. Could be Thorn or his associates circled back." Fear clutched at Catherine's throat. "What should we do?" "Keep moving for now," Mitchell replied calmly. "There's an old line shack about 4 miles ahead. We'll shelter there tonight. Defensible position, if it comes to that." Catherine swallowed hard. "I'm slowing you down. If you hadn't stopped to help me, then I'd still be tracking the same men," Mitchell interrupted. "Don't borrow trouble, Catherine. Right now, we're just 2 travelers making our way across open country." Despite his reassurance, Catherine noticed Mitchell kept his rifle across his saddle horn for the remainder of the day's journey. The ease of their earlier conversation had evaporated, replaced by a vigilant silence broken only by necessary communication. By dusk, they reached the line shack Mitchell had mentioned, a crude but solid structure nestled against a rocky outcropping. While primitive, with just a single room containing a rough-hewn table, a narrow cot, and a small stove, it offered welcome shelter from the increasingly cold night air. "It's not much," Mitchell apologized as he lit a lantern hanging from a ceiling beam. "It's perfect," Catherine replied honestly. After weeks of sleeping under the stars or in dilapidated barns, the shack seemed luxurious. Mitchell secured Sovereign in a small lean-to behind the shack, then gathered wood for the stove. Catherine busied herself organizing their meager supplies, grateful for something useful to do. "I'll sleep outside," Mitchell announced once they'd shared a simple meal of beans and the last of his jerky. "That's ridiculous," Catherine objected. "It's freezing out there." Mitchell shook his head. "I need to keep watch anyway, and it wouldn't be proper. Catherine couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped her. "I think we're well past concerns of propriety, Mr. Blackwood. There's room enough for both of us to sleep in here without compromising anyone's virtue." A hint of amusement flickered across Mitchell's face. "As you wish, Mrs. Williams. But I'll still take first watch." Later, as Catherine lay on the narrow cot beneath Mitchell's spare blanket, she watched him seated by the window, his silhouette outlined against the night sky. There was something comforting about his steady presence, something she hadn't felt in a very long time. "Mitchell," she said softly, "thank you for the fire last night and for everything since." He turned slightly, his profile visible in the dim light from the banked stove. "Get some rest, Catherine. Tomorrow may be a long day." Catherine closed her eyes, but sleep eluded her. After James's death, or more accurately, after she'd fled the nightmare her marriage had become, she'd vowed never to depend on a man again. Yet here she was, placing her safety in the hands of a stranger. A stranger who had shown her more kindness in one day than her husband had in years of marriage. The irony wasn't lost on her. Morning came with an unsettling discovery. While Catherine prepared a simple breakfast, Mitchell returned from checking their surroundings, his expression grim. "We've got company," he announced quietly. "3 riders, keeping their distance but definitely following our trail." Catherine's hands trembled as she set down the coffee pot. "Thorne, can't be certain," Mitchell replied, checking the ammunition in his revolver. "But I don't believe in coincidences. We need to move quickly." They packed swiftly, erasing all signs of their presence from the line shack. Mitchell helped Catherine onto Sovereign, then surprised her by mounting behind her. "Thought you preferred walking," she said as his arms reached around her to take the reins. "Preference gives way to necessity," Mitchell replied. "We need speed now. Sovereign can carry us both for a stretch." The powerful horse set off at a brisk trot, following a narrow game trail that wound deeper into the hills rather than continuing toward Laramie. "We're going the wrong way," Catherine observed, tension evident in her voice. Mitchell guided Sovereign around a sharp bend. "Taking the long way. There's a canyon ahead that'll force anyone following us to come at us head-on. No way to circle around." "You're setting a trap," Catherine realized. "More like choosing our ground," Mitchell corrected. "If these men are just travelers, they'll pass on through. If they're looking for trouble, better to meet it on our terms." Catherine fell silent, acutely aware of Mitchell's solid presence behind her, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the careful way he held himself to maintain a respectful distance despite their shared saddle. By mid-morning, they reached the canyon Mitchell had described, a narrow passage between towering sandstone walls, with a small spring-fed pool at its center. He dismounted, helping Catherine down before leading Sovereign to water. "What now?" Catherine asked, scanning the imposing rock walls. Mitchell pointed to a narrow ledge about 20 feet up the canyon wall. "That's our vantage point. Good view of the approach, plenty of cover." He studied her face. "Can you climb?" Catherine nodded, though the prospect terrified her. She'd fled Denver in a fashionable traveling dress that had become tattered and filthy over the weeks. At least she'd had the foresight to wear sturdy boots. "Here," Mitchell said, shrugging out of his duster and holding it out to her. "This will give you more freedom to move." Catherine accepted the coat, slipping it over her dress. The garment engulfed her, still warm from his body. As she rolled up the sleeves, she caught Mitchell watching her with an unreadable expression. "What is it?" she asked. He shook his head slightly. "Nothing. You remind me of someone." Before Catherine could inquire further, Mitchell began transferring supplies to a small pack. "We'll leave Sovereign here. He's trained to stay put unless there's immediate danger." The climb to the ledge proved challenging but manageable. Mitchell went first, showing Catherine where to place her hands and feet, occasionally reaching down to help her pass difficult sections. By the time they reached the ledge, Catherine's heart was pounding from exertion and adrenaline. The natural shelf in the rock was deeper than it had appeared from below, creating a small alcove that would shield them from both weather and observation. Mitchell arranged their supplies efficiently, then settled with his rifle resting across his lap, eyes fixed on the canyon entrance. "Now we wait," he said simply. The hours crept by in tense silence. Catherine found herself studying Mitchell's profile, the stern set of his jaw, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow. He was nothing like the men she'd known in her previous life. There was no artifice to him, no hidden agenda beneath smooth words. "Tell me about the person I remind you of," Catherine said when the silence became unbearable. Mitchell didn't take his eyes from the canyon entrance. "My sister, Rebecca. She had your same determination." "Had?" Catherine asked gently. "Died in '73. Cholera outbreak." The words were clipped, edged with old pain. "She was a schoolteacher too." "I'm sorry," Catherine offered, knowing the inadequacy of the words. Mitchell nodded once, accepting her sympathy without comment. Then he stiffened, raising a hand for silence. They're coming. Catherine peered over the edge to see 3 riders entering the canyon at a cautious pace. Even from a distance, she could tell these weren't ordinary travelers. They rode in a tactical formation, rifles ready, scanning the canyon walls as they advanced. "Friends of yours?" she whispered. Mitchell's expression hardened. "The one in front is Thorn. Don't recognize the others." "What's the plan?" Catherine asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. Mitchell checked his rifle once more. "I'll call them out. Give them a chance to surrender peacefully." He glanced at her. "Stay down and out of sight, no matter what happens." Before Catherine could protest, Mitchell moved to the edge of the ledge. "That's far enough. Thorn," he called out, his voice echoing off the canyon walls. The riders halted abruptly, hands moving to their weapons as they searched for the source of the voice. "Blackwood," the lead rider called back, spotting Mitchell on the ledge. "Should have known you'd be too stubborn to quit." "Where are my horses, Thorn?" Mitchell demanded. Thorn laughed, a harsh sound that carried in the enclosed space. "Sold 'em to a buyer in Montana. Your Mexican friend shouldn't have interfered." "His name was Emilio Vasquez," Mitchell replied, his voice dangerously calm. "He left a wife and daughter." "Ain't that a shame?" Thorn mocked. "You planning to shoot all 3 of us from up there, Blackwood? Even you ain't that fast." Mitchell's grip tightened on his rifle. "I'm giving you one chance. Throw down your weapons and come peacefully to face the law in Laramie." The 3 men exchanged glances, then Thorn spat on the ground. "I got a counteroffer. You and your woman come down, and maybe we'll let her live after we're done with you." Catherine felt ice spread through her veins. They knew she was here. She glanced around frantically, searching for a weapon, anything she could use to defend herself. "Last chance, Thorn," Mitchell warned, seemingly unperturbed by the threat. Thorn's response was to draw his pistol, but Mitchell was faster. The crack of his rifle split the air, and Thorn clutched his shoulder, his weapon falling to the dirt. The canyon erupted into chaos. The other 2 riders opened fire, bullets ricocheting off the rock around their position. Mitchell returned fire methodically, his movements precise and controlled despite the danger. Catherine pressed herself against the back wall of the alcove, heart hammering in her chest. Then she spotted Mitchell's revolver in its holster, set aside when he'd chosen to use the rifle. Making a split-second decision, she crawled forward and drew the weapon. One of the riders had dismounted and was attempting to scale the canyon wall toward their position. Mitchell, focused on exchanging fire with Thorn and the other man, hadn't noticed the threat. "Mitchell," Catherine called out, raising the revolver with shaking hands. He turned, spotting the climbing man instantly. Without hesitation, Mitchell shifted his rifle and fired, sending the man tumbling back to the canyon floor. In that moment of distraction, a bullet from below grazed Mitchell's arm, tearing through his shirt sleeve. He grunted in pain, but maintained his position. "You hit?" Catherine asked, crawling to his side with the revolver still clutched in her hand. "It's nothing," Mitchell replied, though she could see blood spreading across his sleeve. "Stay back." Below, Thorn and his remaining companion had taken cover behind rocks near the spring. The standoff continued for what felt like hours, but was likely only minutes, occasional shots breaking the tense silence. "We're pinned down," Mitchell muttered, more to himself than to Catherine. "And they know it." Catherine studied the canyon, an idea forming. "The horse," she whispered. "Sovereign is still down there." Mitchell glanced at her sharply. "What are you thinking? You said he's trained." "If he caused a distraction, too risky." Mitchell cut her off. "They'd shoot him." "They have to see him first," Catherine pointed out. She withdrew the small derringer from her boot. "I still have this. If I create a diversion on the far side of the canyon." "Absolutely not," Mitchell interrupted. "I won't have you putting yourself in danger." "And I won't sit here waiting for them to kill us both," Catherine retorted. Before Mitchell could stop her, she had moved to the back of the ledge where a narrow crevice offered a possible descent route. "Catherine, don't," Mitchell began, but she was already slipping into the crevice. The descent was treacherous, loose rocks threatening to give away her position with every movement. Catherine kept Mitchell's revolver tucked into the waistband of her dress, using both hands to navigate the rough stone. When she reached the canyon floor, she pressed herself against the wall, hidden from the men's line of sight by a large boulder. Sovereign stood exactly where they'd left him, ears pricked forward at the sound of gunfire, but remaining steadfast. Catherine crept toward him, keeping low. The horse's ears swiveled toward her as she approached, but he made no sound. Reaching the horse, Catherine quickly untied Mitchell's rope from the saddle. With trembling fingers, she fashioned a crude fuse using her handkerchief and a small vial of medicinal alcohol. She carried in her pocket a trick she'd learned from her father's mining days. Taking a deep breath, Catherine struck a match and lit the fuse, then hurled the makeshift device as far as she could toward the opposite wall of the canyon. The glass shattered against rock, the alcohol igniting with a whoosh of flame. The distraction worked. Both men turned toward the sudden fire, giving Mitchell the opening he needed. 2 rapid shots rang out from the ledge, and one of the men fell. Thorne, realizing he was now alone, made a desperate dash for his horse. Catherine acted without thinking. She slapped Sovereign's flank hard, sending the trained horse charging directly at Thorne. The rustler, caught between the charging horse and Mitchell's rifle, threw down his weapon and raised his hands in surrender. "Don't shoot," he shouted. "I give up." Mitchell's voice rang out from above. "Face down on the ground, hands behind your head." As Thorne complied, Catherine emerged from her hiding place, Mitchell's revolver trained steadily on the rustler. She looked up to see Mitchell staring down at her, his expression a mixture of anger and amazement. "That," he called down, "was the damn foolish thing I've ever seen." Despite everything, Catherine felt a smile tug at her lips. "You're welcome, Mr. Blackwood." Within the hour, they had Thorne securely bound and the bodies of his companions laid across their horses. Mitchell's wound proved to be minor, a deep graze that Catherine cleaned and bandaged using supplies from his saddlebags. "You could have been killed," Mitchell said quietly as she tied off the bandage. Catherine met his gaze unflinchingly. "So could you. I made a choice." "A reckless one," he countered, but there was something besides anger in his eyes now, a respect that hadn't been there before. "Perhaps," Catherine acknowledged. "But it worked." Mitchell studied her for a long moment. "Where did you learn to think like that?" Catherine's hands stilled on the bandage. "My father was a mining engineer. I grew up around men who solved problems with whatever tools were at hand." She didn't add that her years with James had taught her to be resourceful in far darker ways. They made camp in the canyon that night, neither willing to travel with their prisoner in the dark. Thorne sat sullenly by the fire, hands and feet bound, while Mitchell kept a watchful eye on him. Catherine prepared a simple meal from their remaining supplies, the familiar routine helping to calm her still jangled nerves. "What happens now?" she asked as they ate. "We take him to Laramie," Mitchell replied. "Sheriff there will hold him for trial." And after that, the question hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Mitchell set down his plate. "I still aim to see you safely to your cousins, and then return to your ranch," Catherine finished for him. "Yes." Mitchell glanced at Thorne, then back to Catherine. "Though I admit, it might seem a bit quiet after today." Catherine smiled despite herself. "I imagine it might." As night deepened around them, Catherine found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The day's events kept replaying in her mind not just the danger and the violence, but the moment she'd chosen to act rather than remain a passive victim of circumstance. It was a turning point, she realized. The woman who had fled Denver would never have done what she did today. Mitchell sat nearby, keeping watch while Thorne slept, bound and under guard. He'd insisted Catherine take the bedroll while he made do with his saddle for a pillow. In the firelight, the planes of his face seemed softer somehow, the stern lines relaxed. "Why did you really help me that first night?" Catherine asked softly, propping herself up on one elbow. Mitchell considered the question. "Told you already. Nobody should be alone with a dead fire." "There's more to it than that," Catherine pressed. After a long pause, Mitchell spoke. "When I found you, you reminded me of myself after the war. Lost. Running from something." He met her gaze directly. "I didn't know what your demons were, still don't. But I know what it's like to need someone to light a fire and stay until morning." The simple honesty of his answer made Catherine's throat tighten. "I wasn't always this person," she whispered. "This frightened, half-starved woman running away in the night." "None of us were always what we are now," Mitchell replied. "Life has a way of remaking us when we're not looking." Catherine lay back down, staring up at the stars visible through the canyon opening. Do you think we get to choose what we become next? Mitchell added another stick to the fire. I'd like to think so. Otherwise, what's the point of surviving? The question lingered in Catherine's mind as she finally drifted to sleep, the steady presence of Mitchell Blackwood keeping watch through the night. The journey to Laramie took 3 days of cautious travel with their sullen prisoner in tow. Despite the circumstances, Catherine found herself more at ease in Mitchell's company with each passing mile. Their conversations ranged from books they'd read to places they'd seen, carefully skirting the painful chapters of their respective pasts. Mitchell, she discovered, had a dry wit that emerged when least expected. He was well read for a man who'd spent most of his life in the saddle, with a particular fondness for Whitman's poetry that surprised her. In turn, Catherine shared her knowledge of botany, identifying plants along their route and explaining their uses, skills her father had taught her long before she became a teacher. On the afternoon of the third day, Laramie appeared on the horizon, a growing settlement that had sprung up around the railroad. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the spire of a small church punctuated the skyline. To Catherine, it represented both sanctuary and uncertainty. Your cousin's shop, Mitchell said as they approached the town limits. Do you know where it is? Catherine shook her head. Clara wrote years ago that she'd opened a millinery on Front Street. I can only hope she's still there. Mitchell nodded. We'll deliver Thorne to the sheriff first, then find your cousin. The Laramie sheriff, a grizzled man named Doherty, received them with minimal ceremony but evident satisfaction at Thorne's capture. Been looking for this one for months, he told Mitchell as deputies led the prisoner away. Got warrants on him from 3 territories. What about my hands? Mitchell asked. Emilio Vasquez. Doherty's expression sobered. We'll see justice done, Blackwood. You have my word. With their prisoner delivered, Mitchell and Catherine stood on the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, suddenly awkward in each other's presence. The shared purpose that had united them was fulfilled. Front Street's this way, Mitchell said, gesturing down the dusty thoroughfare. Shall we find your cousin? Catherine nodded, though apprehension gnawed at her. What if Clara refused to take her in? What if she wasn't even here anymore? They located the millinery shop without difficulty, a neat establishment with elaborately decorated hats displayed in the window. A bell tinkled as they entered, and a well-dressed woman looked up from her work. Clara? Catherine asked hesitantly. The woman squinted, then her eyes widened in recognition. Catherine? Good heavens! She rushed forward, embracing Catherine before holding her at arm's length. What on earth happened to you? You look like I've been traveling rough, Catherine finished with a weak smile. It's a long story. Clara's gaze shifted to Mitchell, who stood respectfully by the door, hat in hand. And who is this gentleman? Mitchell Blackwood, Catherine said. He's been helping me. Clara's eyebrows rose slightly, but she extended a hand. Clara Winters. Thank you for assisting my cousin, Mr. Blackwood. Madam, Mitchell acknowledged with a nod. Mrs. Williams has been through quite an ordeal. She could use a safe place to rest. Clara looked between them, clearly curious but too well-mannered to press for details in front of a stranger. Of course, I have rooms above the shop. Catherine, you're welcome to stay as long as you need. Relief flooded through Catherine. Thank you, Clara. I promise I'll explain everything. An awkward silence fell as the reality of parting loomed. Mitchell cleared his throat. Well, I should be getting on. Got a ranch waiting. Yes, of course, Catherine replied, suddenly finding it difficult to meet his eyes. Thank you, Mitchell, for everything. He settled his hat back on his head. Take care of yourself, Mrs. Williams. Catherine watched him walk to the door, a strange hollowness spreading in her chest. Before she could reconsider, she called out, Mitchell. He turned, his expression carefully neutral. Where exactly is your ranch? In case I wanted to write. Something flickered in Mitchell's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or hope. North Star Ranch. Any mail to Clearwater Creek will find me. Clara looked between them with growing interest. Mr. Blackwood, surely you're not leaving town tonight? It's nearly dusk. Why not stay for supper at least? I insist. Mitchell hesitated, then nodded. Much obliged, Mrs. Winters. I could use a proper meal before heading back. That evening, after Catherine had bathed and changed into a borrowed dress of Clara's, the 3 of them shared a simple but nourishing meal in Clara's comfortable apartments above the shop. The transformation in Catherine's appearance was striking: clean hair pulled back in a simple knot, cheeks flushed with warmth rather than windburn, the borrowed dress slightly too large, but infinitely more presentable than her travel-worn garments. Mitchell, too, had made efforts to improve his appearance. He'd visited the barber and bathed at the town bathhouse, his hair still damp and his face freshly shaven. He'd donned a clean shirt beneath his vest, though he still wore his trail-dusty trousers and boots. Clara proved to be a gracious hostess and a tactful one. She asked no prying questions about Catherine's circumstances or her relationship with Mitchell, instead keeping the conversation light with news of Laramie and mutual acquaintances from their childhood. As the evening drew to a close, Clara excused herself with a transparent pretext about checking the shop ledgers, leaving Catherine and Mitchell alone in the small parlor. "Your cousin seems kind," Mitchell observed, breaking the silence. Catherine nodded. "She always was. I should have come to her sooner, but—" She trailed off, unwilling to venture into explanations. "Pride's a hard thing to swallow," Mitchell offered. "Took me years to learn that lesson." "It wasn't just pride," Catherine admitted. "It was shame." Mitchell studied her face. "Whatever happened in Denver, Catherine, it doesn't define you." The gentle understanding in his voice nearly undid her. "How can you be so certain when you don't even know what I'm running from?" "Because I've seen who you are," Mitchell replied simply. "Saw it in that canyon when you put yourself at risk. Saw it every night when you insisted on taking watch so I could rest, even though you were exhausted yourself. Whatever you did or didn't do before, that's the person you are now." Catherine blinked back sudden tears. "My husband didn't die of consumption," she said abruptly. "James was cruel, controlling. When his business failed, he became violent. One night, he threatened to kill me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I defended myself. He fell and hit his head. I ran." Mitchell's expression remained unchanged. "Did you mean to kill him?" "No," Catherine answered honestly. "I just wanted him to stop hurting me." "Then you've nothing to be ashamed of," Mitchell said firmly. "Though I understand why you ran. The law doesn't always look kindly on women defending themselves." Catherine studied his face, searching for judgment and finding none. "I've been looking over my shoulder for months, expecting James's business partners to come after me. They believed I had access to funds he'd hidden away." "Did you?" "No. There was nothing left. He'd gambled it all away. But they wouldn't believe that." Catherine sighed. "So I kept running until I couldn't run anymore. That's when you found me." Mitchell was silent for a long moment. "What will you do now?" "Stay with Clara for a while. Try to build something new." Catherine managed a small smile. "I was a good teacher once. Perhaps I could be again." "I've no doubt of that," Mitchell said, rising to his feet. "It's getting late. I should head to the hotel." Catherine stood as well. "When will you leave for your ranch?" "First light," Mitchell replied. "Got hands waiting on my return and winter preparations to oversee." The thought of him riding away left Catherine with an unexpected ache. This man who had lit a fire beside her and stayed through the night, who had shown her kindness without expectation of return, who had seen her at her worst and treated her with unfailing respect, he would be gone from her life as suddenly as he had entered it. "I meant what I said about writing," she said quietly. Mitchell's eyes held hers. "I'd welcome your letters, Catherine. North Star can be a lonely place. And perhaps," Catherine ventured, her heart pounding, "when I'm settled, I might visit. Laramie to Clearwater Creek can't be so very far." Something softened in Mitchell's weathered face. "I'd like that." In the doorway, he paused. "Catherine, whatever happens next, remember this: you're stronger than you know. Saw that the moment you pulled that derringer on me by the campfire." "Despite everything," Catherine laughed. "Not my finest moment." "I disagree," Mitchell said with the ghost of a smile. "It was the moment I knew you were a woman worth knowing." After he left, Catherine stood by the window, watching his tall figure move down the gaslit street until he disappeared from view. For the first time in months, the future didn't loom as a fearful unknown, but as a landscape of possibilities. Clara returned, settling beside Catherine at the window. "He seems a good man," she observed. "He is," Catherine agreed softly. "And more than a little taken with you," Clara added with a knowing look. Catherine felt warmth rise to her cheeks. "We've only known each other a few days." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Clara replied. especially out here, where life doesn't grant many second chances or leisurely courtships. She squeezed Catherine's hand. Now, why don't you tell me the whole story, cousin? And don't leave anything out. Into the night, the two women talked, reconnecting across the years of separation. Catherine shared everything: James's abuse, her desperate flight, the weeks of hardship, and the night a stranger had lit a fire beside her when all hope seemed lost. The following morning, Catherine woke before dawn. Without analyzing her impulse, she dressed quickly in her own clothes, now cleaned and mended by Clara's skilled hands, and made her way to the hotel where Mitchell was staying. She found him in the stable, preparing Sovereign for the journey home. He looked up in surprise as she approached. "Catherine, is everything all right?" "Yes," she said, suddenly uncertain now that she stood before him. I wanted to say goodbye properly." Mitchell secured the cinch on Sovereign's saddle before turning to face her. "Your cousin taking good care of you?" Catherine nodded. "She's been wonderful. Has already offered me work in the shop until I can find a teaching position." "Good. That's good." Mitchell shifted his weight, seemingly as awkward as she felt. "You'll do well here, Catherine. Laramie's growing. They'll need teachers." "Yes, I expect they will." Catherine took a deep breath. "Mitchell, I wanted to thank you. Not just for the escort or for dealing with Thorne. For treating me like a person of value when I'd forgotten my own worth." Mitchell's expression softened. "You never lost your worth, Catherine. Just temporarily misplaced your awareness of it." The simple wisdom of his words made her smile. "Perhaps you're right." Mitchell checked his saddlebags, clearly preparing for immediate departure. Catherine felt time slipping away too quickly. "I've been thinking," she said, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider, "about what you said regarding choices and what we become next." Mitchell paused, giving her his full attention. "I've spent months running away," Catherine continued. "From James, from Denver, from myself in many ways. I think it's time I started moving toward something instead." "Toward teaching again?" Mitchell suggested. "Yes, eventually. But first." Catherine gathered her courage. "First, I'd like to see North Star Ranch. If the offer still stands." Mitchell went very still. "It stands," he said quietly. "But Catherine, are you certain? It's rough country, and I'm a rough man. Not much comfort or society out there." "I've had enough society to last a lifetime," Catherine replied with feeling. "As for comfort, I've learned there are many kinds. The comfort of honesty, of respect, of a fire lit in the darkness when hope seems lost." She met his gaze steadily. "Those mean more to me now than fine furnishings or proper drawing rooms ever did." Mitchell studied her face, searching for doubt. "What about your cousin? Your plans to teach?" "Clara understands. Better than I expected, actually." Catherine smiled ruefully. "She said she recognized the look on my face when I watch you. Said it's the same one she wore when she met her late husband." A hint of color touched Mitchell's cheeks. "And teaching? There are children near your ranch who need education, I imagine?" "A fair number," Mitchell acknowledged. "Nearest school's 20 miles away. Then perhaps there's work for me there as well." Catherine took a step closer. "I'm not asking for promises, Mitchell. Just a chance to see if what began beside that campfire might grow into something more. If it doesn't," she shrugged, "Laramie will still be here." Mitchell was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then slowly, he reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm against her skin. "North Star's not much to look at," he warned. "Main house needs work. Been focusing on the barn and corrals instead." "I'm handy with a hammer," Catherine replied, hope rising within her. A smile broke across Mitchell's face, transforming his stern features. "So I've noticed." He glanced at Sovereign, then back to Catherine. "It's a long ride. Sure you're up for it?" Catherine thought of the woman she'd been just days ago, half frozen beside a dead fire, hopeless and alone. Then she thought of who she might become beside this man who had rekindled more than just flames in the wilderness. "I am," she said with certainty. "Though I'll need to gather my things and say a proper goodbye to Clara." "I can wait," Mitchell said, still holding her hand. "Been waiting for something like you most of my life without knowing it." The simple declaration, devoid of flowery sentiment but filled with honest feeling, meant more to Catherine than all of James's elaborate professions of love ever had. 2 hours later, they rode out of Laramie together, Catherine seated comfortably behind Mitchell on Sovereign's broad back, her arms around his waist, and her few possessions packed in saddlebags. Clara had tearfully embraced her, extracting promises of letters and future visits, then pressed a small package into her hands, a wedding gift. She'd called it with a knowing smile, though Catherine had protested they were getting ahead of themselves. As Laramie receded behind them, Catherine felt not the fear of the unknown that had haunted her for months, but a curious sense of homecoming. The future stretched before them, uncertain, perhaps, but full of possibility. "Mitchell," she said as they crested a hill that offered a view of the vast Wyoming landscape. "Tell me about North Star. What does it look like in spring?" And as they rode northwest, Mitchell described the ranch that would become their home, the meadows that bloomed with wildflowers after the snow melted, the clear creek that ran through the property, the stands of aspen that turned gold in autumn. He spoke of improvements he planned, of horses yet to be bred, of dreams deferred while he focused on survival. Gradually, his dreams became possibilities they might pursue together. By the time they made camp that evening, the conversation had shifted from I to we with natural ease. As Mitchell built their fire, a robust blaze that pushed back the October chill, Catherine watched him with a sense of wonder. This man who had once been a stranger, who had kindled flames and hope when both seemed extinguished, was becoming something else entirely. Not quite a husband, not yet a lover, but something just as vital, a partner. A beginning. "What are you thinking?" Mitchell asked, catching her gaze across the firelight. Catherine smiled, remembering the dead fire where he'd found her, and all that had happened since. "I'm thinking that sometimes, the end of one journey is just the beginning of a better one." Mitchell nodded, understanding in his eyes. "And sometimes, a person has to get lost before they can find their way home." As stars appeared overhead and the fire crackled between them, Catherine knew with certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Her past would always be part of her story, but it would no longer define her future. That future began here, beside a fire that would not die before morning, with a man who had promised in actions louder than words that she would never again face the darkness alone. 5 years later, Catherine stood on the porch of North Star Ranch, watching as Mitchell led their 3-year-old daughter Emma on her first riding lesson atop a gentle pony. The little girl's delighted laughter carried across the yard, mingling with the everyday sounds of ranch life: horses nickering in the corral, chickens clucking in their pen, the distant lowing of cattle in the meadow. The ranch had flourished in the years since Catherine had first arrived. The main house, once Spartan and utilitarian, had become a true home under her care. Curtains brightened the windows, a garden provided fresh vegetables in summer, and the small library Mitchell had built for her birthday housed her growing collection of books. Most significantly, the front room now served as a schoolhouse 3 days a week, where Catherine taught the children from neighboring ranches alongside Emma. Her reputation as an educator had spread throughout the county, bringing students from as far as 15 miles away. Clara visited regularly from Laramie, having found a capable assistant to mind her shop during her absences. She had become Aunt Clara to Emma, always arriving with small gifts and stories from town. As for Mitchell and Catherine, the tentative connection that had begun beside a campfire had deepened into a love neither had dared imagine possible. They had married 6 months after arriving at North Star, in a simple ceremony performed by a circuit-riding preacher. The challenges had been many: harsh winters, financial setbacks, the isolation of ranch life, but they had faced each one together. Mitchell had proven to be a different kind of husband than Catherine had feared to hope for. He valued her opinions, respected her independence, and partnered with her in all aspects of their life together. The shadows of her first marriage had gradually receded, though occasionally nightmares still disturbed her sleep. On those nights, Mitchell would simply hold her until the fear passed, his steady presence more healing than any words could be. Now, watching him with their daughter, Catherine felt a contentment that sometimes still surprised her. Emma had his determined chin and Catherine's curious eyes, a perfect blending of them both. Mitchell looked up, catching Catherine's gaze across the yard. The smile that spread across his weathered face was one reserved only for her, a private acknowledgement of all they'd built together and all that was yet to come. He lifted Emma from the pony and set her on his shoulders, carrying her toward the house. "Mama," Emma called excitedly, "I rode all by myself." I saw, sweetheart, Catherine replied, coming down the steps to meet them. You're a natural, just like your father. Mitchell set Emma down, and she raced off to tell Sovereign, now a pampered elder statesman of the stable, about her adventure. The old horse had a special fondness for the little girl, tolerating her attention with equine patience. She did well, Mitchell said, slipping an arm around Catherine's waist. Fearless, like her mother. Catherine leaned into his embrace. I was hardly fearless when you found me. Weren't you? Mitchell countered. Takes courage to keep going when everything's against you. Takes courage to trust a stranger who lights a fire beside you. Perhaps, Catherine conceded. Or perhaps I was simply too exhausted to be properly cautious. Mitchell chuckled, the sound warm against her hair. Either way, I'm grateful. Every day. They stood together, watching Emma chatter to Sovereign, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the ranch yard. In the distance, the hands were bringing in the cattle for the night, dust rising from the herd in golden clouds. Any regrets? Mitchell asked quietly, a question he still posed occasionally, as if part of him couldn't quite believe their happiness. Catherine turned in his arms, raising a hand to his cheek. The face she had once found stern and weathered had become the landscape of her heart, familiar, beloved, essential. Only that I didn't find you sooner, she answered truthfully. Though perhaps we each needed our separate journeys to be ready when we met. Mitchell nodded, understanding as he always did. Some fires need time to build before they can burn steady. And some, Catherine replied, stretching up to kiss him. Once lit, never go out. As the sun set behind the distant mountains, casting the ranch in shades of amber and gold, Catherine thought of that night 5 years ago when she had lain beside a dead fire, hope extinguished, future uncertain. She could never have imagined then that a stranger's kindness would lead to this life, this home, this family, this love that had become the center of her world. Mitchell had once told her that nobody should be alone with a newly lit fire, that it needed tending, same as people sometimes do. What he couldn't have known was how thoroughly that simple act of human kindness would transform them both, kindling a flame that would warm them through all the seasons of their lives together. Emma ran back to them, breathless with excitement about tomorrow's riding lesson. As Mitchell lifted her into his arms, his other arms still around Catherine, she knew with absolute certainty that this moment, this family, this love was what she had been moving toward all along, even when she thought she was merely running away. The fire Mitchell had lit that cold October night had never gone out. It never would.